is an extremely serious matter. Canada and the world still have many questions that must be answered. Earlier this morning, I spoke with President Rouhani of Iran. I told him that Iran's admission that its own armed forces unintentionally shot down Flight 752 is an important step towards providing answers for families, but I noted that many more steps must be taken. A full and complete investigation must be conducted. We need full clarity on how such a horrific tragedy could have occurred. Families are seeking justice and accountability, and they deserve closure. I reiterated to President Rouhani that it is absolutely necessary that Canada participate in this investigation. We expect the full cooperation of Iranian authorities. Currently, 3 visas have been approved for members of the Standing Rapid Deployment Team. We expect that the lead members of this team will arrive in Tehran around 4 p.m. today and establish a presence on the ground to support Canadian families. Additional team members will follow. We're working with our partners who are facilitating the process by which visas are granted, and currently the Iranians are cooperating in granting visas. During my
call with President Rouhani, I also condemned the Iranian strikes in Iraq, which jeopardized the lives of our members who have been fighting Daesh and other coalition members. I called for de-escalation of the tensions in order to ensure peace and stability in the region.
It is at times of tension like these that tragedies like this crash can happen, causing great loss of innocent life. President Rouhani's response to me was a commitment to collaborate, to give closure to the victims, de-escalate tensions in the region, and continue this dialogue. Our focus remains accountability, transparency, and justice for the families and loved ones of the victims. As Minister Champagne said yesterday, our government is taking additional steps to provide more support to those grieving. I've asked the Clerk of the Privy Council to set up an emergency task force, which convened earlier today. Additionally, consular and immigration officials have been dispatched across the country so that they can be in direct contact with the families of Canadians affected by this tragedy. Minister Mendicino has set up an emergency line to ensure that officials from Immigration Canada are available to help with any visa issues. Minister Champagne
and myself will continue to remain in contact with other governments so that families get the support they need. I've spoken to all opposition leaders and to many premiers in the affected provinces. When Canada goes through times of great difficulty, Canadians show solidarity toward one another. In the face of this tragedy, we were there for our neighbors, for our communities, and our fellow citizens. I know that this outburst of compassion will continue in the wake of this tragedy. But this government will not stop calling for answers to the questions that remain unanswered. We will be there, I will be there to ensure that full light is shed on these upsetting incidents.
As are my ministers. Last night, I spoke to Prime Minister Abe of Japan, who is on his way to the Middle East. And I will soon be speaking again with Ukrainian President Zelensky and Swedish Prime Minister Löfven. Minister Champagne has been in touch with his counterparts from Iran, Switzerland, Turkey, Sweden, and Ukraine, in part to discuss progress on issuing visas for our teams. He will also reconvene a second call of the International Coordination and Response Group for the Families of Victims of PS 752 to coordinate our response for the families, together with representatives from Ukraine, Sweden, Afghanistan, and the United Kingdom, who are also grieving. Minister Garneau
has spoken to French authorities earlier today. I assure you that all those discussions will be ongoing.
I want to end by sharing with you a bit of what I did yesterday. I had a chance to sit with some of the families of the victims. They are hurt, angry, and grieving. They want answers. They want justice. What Iran has admitted to is very serious. Shooting down a civilian aircraft is horrific. Iran must take full responsibility. Canada will not rest until we get the accountability, justice, and closure that the families deserve. Encore une fois, merci d'être des nôtres.
Once again, thanks for being here this morning, and we will now take questions.
Afternoon, Prime Minister. Now that Iran has admitted guilt, are you more confident that families are going to be able to bring their loved ones home, and is there a timeline on that?
The admission of Iran of responsibility in this horrific crash is a very important first step. And we have seen from Iran a willingness to facilitate consular access, support for the families, but it is too early to have a sense of timelines in terms of when they will be able to return with their family members.
You just had a chance to speak with Rouhani. I mean, should Iran compensate Canadian families here?
That is certainly something that is going to need to be part of the mix. I sat down with a number of families who are absolutely devastated with the loss of loved ones. They are facing financial challenges on top of the extraordinary grief that they are feeling right now. And we need to make sure that those families get the justice that they deserve.
So Matthew Goyen, Radio-Canada, and then we're going to go to Mia Rapson, Canadian Press.
Bonjour, Mathieu Goyen, Radio-Canada.
Good afternoon.
Quelle garantie avez-vous été capable d'obtenir ou non
guarantee
durant
do you
votre appel
have,
avec le président Rouhani sur
from
la
President
tenue d'une enquête qui va
Rouhani
être complète et indépendante, comme vous le
there will
demandez?
be
À
a
quel
full
point
and
faites-vous
independent
confiance au régime
investigation?
iranien
How
pour ça?
much trust do you put in the Iranian authorities? Answer. I think the fact that they've accepted responsibility for the missile strike, which brought the plane down, I think that establishes already that they're open to having an investigation to find out exactly what happened. We need to make sure, obviously, that it's a credible investigation with independent international investigators involved. But once Iran took responsibility for what happened, there has been every indication that they are open to a full and open investigation.
Obviously, there have been calls for a credible international investigation from the very beginning. The fact that Iran has now taken responsibility for the downing of that aircraft means that it is likely that they will be full participants and fully allow a credible, independent international investigation with all partners involved. We still have work to do to ensure that happens, but the question of responsibility, I think, takes us a step forward towards truly having a very credible and thorough investigation.
J'ai une question. L'Iran fait un lien direct entre cette tragédie-là
Iran
et
draws a
l'assassinat de
direct
Farah en disant
connection
cette tension-là vient
between this
du
tragedy
conflit avec les
and
États-Unis.
the
Est-ce que vous
conflict with the
continuez à ne pas
U.S.
faire de lien, vous, entre
Do
ces deux
you
événements?
make any such connection? Answer. I think that in times of conflict and tension, that's precisely when innocent lives are lost. Obviously, in this context, in the Middle East these days, that contributed to this tragedy. But Iran did the right thing and took responsibility for the downing of this plane and for this tragedy.
And Boris Poole of Radio-Canada.
Mr. Prime Minister, you said that the tensions in the region sort of contributed to this, and you expect Iran to take full responsibility. But Iran is still pointing some fingers at the United States, as are many others, for raising tensions in the first place. Do you share those views, and do you plan to speak with the U.S. President and discuss it?
I've had a number of conversations with the U.S. President recently and will continue to. The reality is there have been significant tensions in that region for a long time. And what we are calling for now is a de-escalation to ensure that there are no more tragic accidents or loss of civilian life, as well as moving forward to the peace and stability that is deserved by everyone in the region. Our focus right now is primarily on ensuring accountability, answers, and closure for the victims, and that is what we are engaged with.
The Ukrainian airlines executives are questioning why Iran didn't warn them about this, that there were potential missiles in the area, that they didn't close the airspace. Are you confident that this was actually an accident?
This is one of the issues that we certainly need better answers to, and that's why this first step of admission of responsibility is an important one by Iran, but there are many other questions like that one that we'll need clear answers to in the coming days and weeks.
Okay, so Boris Prou, Radio-Canada, and then it's going to be Ashley Burke, CBC.
Boris Prou, Radio-Canada. J'aimerais savoir, plusieurs familles se sont dit fâchées, outrées.
A lot of families have said that they're angry and upset. What's your reaction, Prime Minister? Are you also upset? Answer: yes, I'm furious that there are Canadian families that have lost their parents, their children, their spouses. It's a huge tragedy for the entire country, not just for the Iranian community. The Iranian-Canadian community is a community that has contributed greatly to Canada's prosperity. They work very hard. They're very involved. They've believed in this country and the future that they've built here. For many of those families, that has all been struck down out of the blue by a regime that they had fled in the past, that they believed they had gotten away from. This is an accident, or an incident that is truly horrible, and I am angry, I'm disappointed, but I am firmly committed to getting answers and compensation and help and justice for the victims.
I am, of course, outraged and furious that families across this country are grieving the loss of their loved ones, that the Iranian-Canadian community is suffering so greatly, that all Canadians are shocked and appalled at the senseless loss of life. The Iranian-Canadian community is one that has contributed tremendously to this country. Hardworking, proud Canadians, contributing every day to building a better future for themselves and their kids, and too many families are destroyed. Many of these families have fled Iran, fled the regime, tried to build a better life for them elsewhere, and to have the regime that they have left behind accept responsibility for this is a bitter pill indeed.
Right. Ashley Burke, CBC.
What specific demands did you make to President Rouhani on that phone call, and what specific assurances did you get?
I asked that we be fully included in the investigation into the cause of the crash, that all the answers be worked on together, and that we be able to have our investigators involved in everything from the black box to support on DNA identification and the various processes. I asked to ensure that consular access for Canadian officials to support grieving family members is extremely important to us, and I asked him to commit to working with us and international partners to continue to de-escalate tensions in the region.
I asked President Rouhani to make sure that international and Canadian experts be able to fully participate in the investigation into the causes and the various aspects of this tragedy. I asked that we have access to consular services in order to be able to be there in Iran to help Canadian families who are suffering. And I also asked for him to work with Canada and the international community to de-escalate tensions
Despite
in the
Iran's
region.
admission, do you believe a crime was committed, and what would justice look like to you in this case?
I think these are exactly the kinds of things that we need better answers to understand exactly what happened, and the conversations around justice and compensation and accountability are questions that families have, that other countries have. We have convened a group of countries that have citizens who were killed in this terrible crash. And we will be looking to answer exactly those questions and moving forward on getting justice and accountability.
We recognize that we need to work together to answer these questions, to get answers, to get justice and compensation for the victims. Those are the questions that will have to be answered in the weeks and months to come.
Toronto Star, and then we're going to go to Mike Licator, Global News.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. Just wondering, what consequences do you think Iran should face for this, and what options does Canada have?
I think those are the questions that the Iranian people are asking, that the international community are asking, that Canadians are asking, and this is something that we will be looking at and working on in the coming days. Our focus right now is ensuring that support for the families, whether it's consular support or support for the investigation to ensure a credible understanding of what actually happened, is the very first step, but there are many more steps to come.
And you said that Iran must take full responsibility for this. I'm just wondering, what are the elements of that? You know, exactly how will you measure whether they have or not?
I think a better understanding of both the actual incident that happened and the context in which it happened, in which a tragic loss of life was able to happen even in a moment of heightened tension. This should never have happened.
Mike Licator, Global National, and then we're going to go to Ryan Tumulty, National Post.
Prime Minister, despite the fact that the Iranian government has taken responsibility for this, how can you have any faith in them given they lied about this for 3 days?
I think that is a very real question that many people are asking. We are looking at the actual facts of what we see. We are seeing Iran grant visas to Canadian consular officials who are right now on their way into Tehran. We're seeing Iran allow Canadian investigators to participate in the crash investigation, but we are going to look for tangible examples of real collaboration and real openness every step of the way, so that we are supporting and looking out for and getting what is needed by the Canadian victims.
And following up on Bruce's question, one would think the consequences that Canada could have for Iran is imposing sanctions. How difficult is that of a diplomatic dance, given that you need access in Iran and they have to grant it to you, but at the same time, there are Canadians who want Iran to face consequences?
I think there are going to be many conversations and reflections on consequences over the coming days and weeks. Right now, we're focusing on what the families most need, and that is answers and access, and that is where all of our efforts are focused.
Okay, Ryan Tumulty, National Post, and then we're going to go to Jason.
Prime Minister, President Rouhani talked on Twitter, in addition to expressing condolences, said that they would investigate and prosecute. I'm wondering if you think that the Iranian system may now find a culprit, blame them, prosecute them without the international community.
I think there is a recognition that there is probably individual culpability in this situation, but there is also a system-wide culpability, and the reflections around that is something that the Iranians and indeed the international partners will be engaged with over the coming weeks as we unfold in this investigation.
And you talked a little bit about Iran's so far willingness, the visas that they have granted so far. Have they granted any visas to our TSB investigators? And are you concerned that they haven't, if they haven't?
I think, Marta, can you speak to the state of the visas?
The TSB investigators just are on the ground as of this morning, and they will be, they have therefore submitted their request for visas, so we're waiting to hear about that. But thus far, we are being assured that visas will be granted both to them and to our consular team. So we'll be able to provide more information on that over the coming days.
Okay, Jason Unruh, Post Millennial.
Public Safety has listed Quds Force as a terrorist entity since 2012. Soleimani was commander of Quds Force. So my first question is, do you think Mr. Soleimani was a legitimate target? And my follow-up question to that is, if you say his killing contributed to events that unfortunately led to the downing of the aircraft, would your government now, I mean, first, can your government trust the regime on that? And would it follow through on listing the entire Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist entity as you voted for in September 2018?
These are the kinds of questions that we will have to be reflecting on in the coming days and weeks. Our focus right now is providing the support to grieving families that need answers, that need closure, that need justice, that need access to consular support both in Iran and in Canada. We are doing everything we can to ensure that that happens in the short term, but obviously there are reflections in the medium and long term as we move forward.
Your defense minister categorized Soleimani's assassination as an act of deterrence, one made, of course, by the United States. Do you agree with that assessment?
I think there are many conclusions that we will be drawing as we move forward and reflecting on these incidents of the past week. Our focus right now is on ensuring that we are giving all the support necessary to families who have suffered immeasurable loss right now. That means access to consular officials. That means being part of a credible investigation so that we get all the answers upon which we can then start to reflect on next steps.
All right. Due to time, I'm going to let one last really quick question. Mackenzie, if you have one.
Prime Minister. Prime Minister, since Iran has made the admission that they shot down the plane, we've seen a number of protests spark up in Tehran, and there's been many Canadians here too who have been very frustrated about that. What's your message to the protesters in Iran?
My message to Canadian families who are grieving is that we will be there for them. The message to people around the world who are outraged at this incident is that they should be demanding answers, and they should be demanding accountability and justice as well. This is a tragedy that should not have happened, and we need to make sure that we are supporting families who are going through terrible grief.
All right. Thank you very much.
Merci tout le monde. Merci.